So, it's been over a year since I bought my Beijing EV160, an inexpensive, all-electric Chinese hatchback. In that time, I've put over 10,000 kilometers on it driving in and around Shenzhen, primarily commuting to work and going out on the weekends. Overall, I've been pretty satisfied given I only paid 45,000 renminbi for the car when it was a year old. But I'll tell you a little more about my experience owning it and some interesting things I've noticed about it over time. Okay, I'll address the question in everyone's mind about Chinese cars first. How's the reliability? If I'm honest, it's not fantastic. Since I've owned it, it has failed catastrophically on the road once. It literally blew a fuse and power wasn't getting to the wheels anymore. So I had to coast to the side of the road and get towed to the shop where it took 3 days to fix. Beijing Auto covered everything though. Aside from the time it wasted out of my life, it didn't cost me a dime. Also, one day when fast charging, the controller, that's the tiny computer under the hood that tells the car how to operate, got fried, and BAIC sent a guy out to replace it. Their service is good, which makes it a little less painful that the car isn't terribly reliable. I can't imagine what will happen when it's out of warranty, though. The interesting thing about replacing the controller, though, was that it was an updated version, and the car's behavior changed slightly. After the replacement, it started to accelerate more quickly and drive more smoothly in general. That makes me wonder if I were able to modify it in some way or hack it in some way, what we could make the car do. Now, another issue, maybe more with some charging equipment than the car itself, is that the slow chargers in the most convenient place for me to charge will not cooperate with the car anymore. They worked before, they don't work now. They'll charge it for a few minutes and then stop automatically. Since this only happens with one particular brand of charging station, I think it's their problem, not mine. That means that to go to the second most convenient charging station, I have to drive up to the 6th story of a parking garage in kind of a dirty part of town to slow charge. It's not horribly inconvenient, but it's definitely not as convenient as it could be. And then we come to the battery life. Has it changed much over the past year? The answer is, thankfully, no. When I ran the battery out on the highway that one time, the car stopped operating at about 14% of the displayed remaining charge. One day, about a week ago, when I was playing that dangerous game again, just as I arrived at the charging station, I was at 23%, and as I parked the car, it started to throw the dead battery error. So, there has been degradation, and it's somewhat significant, but since it was never my intention to keep the car for too long, and OLED EV's resale value in China drops faster than the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, I really don't mind. I knew what I was getting myself into there. So that's the reliability. Now I'll tell you about some interesting things I've noticed about the car. On the interior, there are a few things. Now on the turn signal stock here, there's something interesting I've noticed. So you've got your regular light switch, and then there's also a fog light switch. But this car only has rear fog lights. It doesn't even have front fog lights. So if you're looking for front fog lights, the EV160 cannot help you. So I have to be in the dark for this one. One interesting feature here in the control cluster is this knob. And this knob lets you adjust the position of the headlights. You can move them up or down. So you can see, just turn this little knob here, and it's a little bit difficult actually. The headlights will adjust, and you can actually see it moving up and down. Now I have never really figured out what the purpose of this would be. The only thing I've ever used it for is when people are behind you with your high beams on, which is like almost everybody in China leaves their high beams on 24/7. Then you can get behind them and turn your headlights all the way up and give it to them instead as revenge. So I don't know what it's useful for good. I've only ever really used it for evil. On the instrument cluster, you can see you can press this odometer reset button, and it'll cycle through a few different displays. This one shows voltage. This one shows how many amps you're using. So if I actually move the car here, you can see it'll show you how much electricity you're consuming. I'm not going to go real fast right now because I'm in a school. And also when you use the regeneration, it tells you how much you're getting back. I almost always use the digital speedometer, but sometimes it's fun just to see how much energy you're either sucking out of the battery with aggressive driving, which is what I usually do. I'm not a very economical driver. Or how much you're getting back from regenerative braking, which is fun. So that shows how much amps it's using. This shows your RPMs in case you're curious. It goes pretty fast. And this is just a visual representation of how much power you're using, so it'll get wider or narrower depending on how much you've got your foot in the gas. And of course, I still love having the key ignition. None of that push button nonsense that you find in a lot of other cars these days. You know, this is a car, it's not a TV, so I'm glad I can turn it on with a key, just like cars are supposed to be turned on. Moving on to the infotainment system. It's a very bare bones system, and the touchscreen relies on pressure, not capacitive touch, so it's not quite responsive enough. Setting it to English doesn't really mean everything is in English either. You can see it's set to English right now, but I just see USB and SD. I can read Chinese, but it might be an issue for someone who can't. And I used to have TV shows on here when I was driving around, but the novelty of that kind of wore off because you can't actually watch them unless you're stopped at a traffic light. So I've switched mostly to using USB or Bluetooth to play music and podcasts. When you're playing video on it, I don't have any with me to show you right now, scrolling through it is very clunky and not very convenient. So I've been focusing more on just listening to music and podcasts. The infotainment system also takes way too long to boot up. If I turn the car off and on again, you can see that. Let's just see how long it takes. So that took, what, 25 seconds? Almost 25 seconds. My computer starts up faster than that. I'm gonna sound a little behind the times saying this, but I never knew how nice Bluetooth hands-free calling could be until I got this car. Phone calls are clear and the system works seamlessly with the phone. If only it were a CarPlay system, it would be even better, but I can dream about that. Probably the most lacking feature of the infotainment system, though, is the navigation. Baidu Maps on the phone isn't really fantastic, but the in-dash navigation system on this car is just plain stupid. It never knows where you are, and using the search function is extremely frustrating. I'll show you. First of all, there's no English at all, but if I want to search, now I have to enter the first letter of each pinyin, which is a romanization system. So if I want to go to Pizza Hut, see, this thing's terrible. It's hopeless. No. What a pain. Yes, there you go. Okay. And it hasn't found... Oh, there we go. Fortunately, it was the first result, but that's because it's a very popular chain. And then I can push here, and it'll show me where it is, and I can make it my destination. This thing, the GPS location services are horrible. It never knows where you are, and then the navigation hasn't been updated for a long time. Another really annoying feature is that the infotainment system mutes your volume when you put the car into reverse. So like if I go shift into reverse, now it brings up the screen that just says, reversing, be careful. You know, as if you were planning to be dangerous and then this screen was going to convince you to rethink your plan. So that means if you're parking or you're backing up the car, you don't get to enjoy your jams. Now the sound that comes out of the speakers is good enough, nothing to write home about, but not detrimental to your enjoyment of your music either. The heat and AC controls are easy enough to use. The car defaults to recirculating air, which is a little unusual, but I guess it may have to do with the car's cabin air purification system. With the Beijing market in mind, I'm sure they figured air purification would be something people would want. The pollution's not so bad in Shenzhen, but it's kind of a neat thing to have anyway, to have an air purifier in the car. Now the AC is a godsend because it tends to be hot and humid here. And since this is an EV, it's kind of interesting when you turn off the AC because you can hear it running. That also means it makes some noise, so pedestrians are actually aware of your presence. When the car is running silently, when nothing's turned on, it does tend to sneak up on people and they can stay in your way for a long time. But fortunately in China, honking the horn doesn't offend people nearly as much here as it does in some other countries. But anyway, the AC keeps the car nice and cool inside. It works very well. This little pocket in the dash is also the perfect size, and it's placed very well. The cup holders are okay too, but they're no good for bottles because I don't have one to demonstrate right now, because the dashboard has this overhang here, so you can see where anything tall isn't going to fit into there. There are two other bottle-friendly cup holders though in the map pockets of the door. So the glove compartment brings us to another really interesting thing. This is a very only in China feature, and it really made me laugh. So you can see I can open it, and only half of the available space is being used. And you might wonder, why is that? Well, the reason is that this storage space here is perfectly sized and shaped to hold a carton of cigarettes. So that's very much only in China would you see something like this. And if you smoke, which I don't, but if you do, the EV160 could be a good choice for you. Now I'll talk a little bit about the driving experience. For this kind of entry-level car, as I said in my first video, the smoothness is unbeatable. With light steering and a controller that reads my inputs perfectly, it's totally effortless to drive. Of course, that means it doesn't have the same soul and fun factor of a manual transmission car, but it also means it doesn't have the same slushy frustration that a bad automatic will give you. Hashtag save the manuals. And even though it literally only makes 73 horsepower, that torquey EV acceleration still brings a sense of joy to driving the car. It's no Tesla, but off the line, giving it a little gas pushes you back into your seat and blows away all the gas cars around you. That is, until you hit about 60 kilometers an hour, and then the acceleration becomes more modest. So the acceleration is great, but slowing down is a bit of another story. For gradual braking, of course, the EV160 is excellent, kicking in the regen and letting you recoup some of the power you've used. I've actually seen the average power consumption go negative before when coasting down a long hill. So regen is cool, but the mechanical brakes are not. It has discs in the front and drums in the back. I didn't even know anybody did that anymore. And though it does have ABS, emergency braking feels kind of scary. You really have to stick your foot in there. It's a very heavy car for its size, I think. Another thing with the brakes is that you periodically hear this buzzing sound as the brake pump builds pressure. I think the unique noises this car makes are kind of neat. They remind you that you're having a driving experience that more or less didn't exist 10 years ago. The EV160 does well on the highway, but maintaining 120 kilometers an hour chews up the battery really fast. When I lived in a community with charging stations right at home, I didn't care, but now that charging is an inconvenience, I tend to drive more slowly on the highway just to save power. So there's no denying it, EV driving does require a little sacrifice of fun for the sake of practicality. It makes you older at heart. I'm glad I still have my manual Volkswagen to keep me from getting too boring. Owning the EV160 will definitely never be a status symbol. It's not a very flashy car, and many of the ones on the road are owned by car-sharing apps. Another good portion of them are being used by guys who make their living on Didi, China's own ride-sharing app, and the reason that Uber and Lyft aren't allowed to compete here. This may not mean much to the foreign viewer, but both of those things bring the perceived status of the car down. But for me, I don't care about any of that. I'm trying to drive my car, not flaunt it. Still, it's an interesting cultural point to note. So, overall, after a year of driving the EV160, I can say that I'm happy with my choice. It's a joy to drive, providing a driving experience way above the vehicle's entry-level classification. It doesn't have a fantastic reliability record, but they'll fix it for free. It does everything a hatchback is supposed to do, and most importantly, it was cheap enough for me to buy with cash. None of that financing nonsense that gets so many people into trouble. So you can tell me what you think or ask any questions in the comments. I'm not a professional YouTuber, so I really don't care if you like or subscribe, but I'm glad you watched to this point, and I'm happy to share more about my Chinese electric car. Let's see what it's like after another year.